Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Nonhlanhla Mtshali. The lesson is brought to you by Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Saibono Discovery Center and broadcast by Phakama Research and Development. So today's lesson is still a continuation on human response to an environment, and today's topic is the eye. So let's look at what the exam guidelines say about the eye. So what we need to study for the human eye in grade 12 is to look at the structure and the function of the parts of the eye using a diagram. You need to know the binocular vision and its importance, the changes that occur in the human eye for each of the following using the diagrams, accommodation, pupillary mechanism, also the nature and treatment of the following visual defects using diagram, that is short-sightedness, long-sightedness, astigmatism, and cataracts. So we're going to start with the structure of the eye. Just note the first point is that we're looking at the structure, we're looking at the function of the parts of the eye using a diagram. So it is important that when you do this part or when you study this part at home, you make use of the diagram. So let's look at the external structure of the eye first. So what you see on the eye on the outside, you're looking at the front that is protected by the eyelids. Here are eyelids, the two layers of skin that cover your eye, that is what we call the eyelids. And then there's eyelashes on the eyelids there, as you can see, and then to stop the foreign particles from entering the eye. And then above the eye, we have this part here, which is called the eyebrow, also prevents the sweat that is falling down from your forehead into the eye. And then another feature that you will see when you look into the eye is the colored part of the eye that is called the iris. So this, on this picture here, what we see is the brown part that's on the outside of the circle in the middle. That is what we call the iris. And then the opening in the center of the eye, which is what we call the pupil. And then the white part on each side of the circle, the colored circle, it is what we call the sclera, which is the white covering layer of the eye. So we have the eyebrows, the eyelashes, the eyelids, and what we see in front when you looking into the mirror or you're looking at somebody else, you see all these parts that I've just mentioned. So this is external structure of the eye. And then going into the internal structure, this is what we call the longitudinal section of the eye. So when we do this cross, we're looking at the different layers that are making up the eye. We're looking at the different parts that are found in the eye. And all these parts have a specific role that they do so that your eye is able to form the vision, so that that vision is sent into the brain and where interpretation will take place. So what we're looking at here, we're looking at the different layers, the first three, the sclera, the choroid, and the retina. These are the three layers of the eye, and then all the different parts. So what we're going to do next, we're going to look at each part and the function that it plays or the role that it plays. So this is the diagram that I'm referring to. So what you have in your mind the gap and the topic test that you always do at the end of each topic is a picture of a diagram of the eye that is not labeled. So what you need to do when you study, you take that picture or that diagram that is not labeled, and then you put the labels in a different colored pen, and then next to each label, you write the function of the eye. So that's the only way that you'll be able to learn, and you have everything on one page. It is some sort of a mind map with the eye in the middle and all these different parts that are coming from there and the functions of each part. You can also go further to do the outside layer, which is white. So you leave it white. You're not going to put the color. And then the middle layer, which is the choroid, you can use the red color to differentiate. And then the innermost layer, which is the retina, then you can use a black marker or a pencil just to shade so that you are able to differentiate between the three layers. So let's look at the internal structure of the eye. So we're going to start with the outer layer, which I said it's called the sclera. So this is the outer layer and it's white in color. Its function is to hold or to keep the eye in this shape. We call it the eyeball, remember? So this ball shape like structure needs to be maintained. So what maintains the structure or this shape is this tough elastic layer or inelastic layer, sorry, that covers the eye on the outside at the back of it. So from here, going all the way to the back, we have this white inelastic tough structure that covers the eye. Then it protects the inner parts of the eye. Besides maintaining the shape of the eye, it also protects the inner part. It also maintains the shape of the eye. Then this part, I said it's from the front to the back, and then the front at the front of the eye, we are still looking at the sclera, but we don't call it the sclera. It is now called the cornea. That is the front of the eye. Why is it is the cornea? The cornea is transparent, so it's different from the rest, which is white and non-elastic. It is transparent because this is where the light should enter the eye. So its cornea, it's transparent and it's curved. So it is the curved, transparent part of the eye. It allows the light to enter. Then also its function is that it refracts the light rays when they enter the eye. Then we have the middle layer, which is called the choroid. Remember, this is called the choroid. It is different from the chorion that you find in the developing fetus. Remember when you did human reproduction, when you're looking at the fetus, there's a structure there in the developing fetus that is called the chorion. So that is different from this. So do not mix the two when you study the eye and when you study the human reproduction. So this middle layer is the continuous layer. It continues in front and it becomes the ciliary body. It becomes the iris. So what is the difference between this layer and the outer layer is that the choroid is dark. It is dark pigmented because its function is to absorb the light when it enters the eye. It is also rich in blood capillaries or blood vessels so that it is able to supply the eye with the nutrients and oxygen. Then another layer, the innermost layer, is what we call the retina. So this is the yellow. If you look at this diagram, the retina is the yellow part, the innermost layer of the eye. This innermost layer of the eye contains photoreceptors. So this is where we find the photoreceptors. Remember when we started last week, the lesson that we watched last week, we were told about the receptors. So receptors that are found in the eye, we call them photoreceptors. And there's two types of those photoreceptors. We talk about the rods and the cones. So they are found on the retina, and this is where this is the site. This is where the image is formed in the eye. It is formed on the retina, and it is formed by the rods and the cones. But when we do accommodation and pupillary mechanism, you will learn exactly where the image is formed and where the image is not formed in the eye. And then it also helps to convert the light stimuli into an impulse. This is very important. So when the light strikes the innermost layer, which is the retina, remember it comes in the form of a stimuli, the change in the environment. And then when it gets there, then the receptors, their function is to convert the stimulus, which is light, into an impulse. Then the impulse is sent to the brain where interpretation is going to take place, where an image is going to be formed. Then again on the eye, when you look at the front part, this space, we said the outer layer here in front is called the cornea, but then there is this gap between the cornea and this blue part. This is what we call the aqueous humor. This is the space, and it's filled. The aqueous humor is a liquid that fills the space. So it is aqueous humor. It is filled with a clear liquid, and its function is to give shape to the cornea. Remember the cornea, we said, is this curved part in front of the eye. So why does it remain curved like this? It is because of this aqueous humor that is found here, that is filled with the clear fluid. And the reason why the fluid is clear, because remember, when the light enters the eye, it has to go through the cornea, through the fluid, until it gets into the retina where the image is going to be formed. So it has to be clear so that the light will be able to pass through. And then its other function, besides holding the shape of the cornea, is to supply nutrients and oxygen to the parts of the eye. Then at the back of this structure here, this white structure that you see here, is also a cavity that is filled with, it's called the vitreous humor. So the difference between the aqueous and the vitreous humor, the aqueous, we said it contains a clear fluid. And then the one at the back, it is filled with a jelly-like substance, and this one helps to maintain the shape of the eye. So the shape of the eyeball is not only maintained by the sclera, it is also maintained by the vitreous humor and the aqueous humor. And then its other function is that although it's not a bigger role, it plays a major role in refracting the light rays. Then moving on, this is still a diagram showing the internal structure of the eye. So what I want to point out here is that when you look at this diagram, the white part on the outside, this is what we call the sclera. And then the middle part, you can see clearly here that it is filled, although it is a diagram, but you can see the blood capillaries that are running through blood vessels. And this is what we call the choroid. And then the innermost layer from this diagram, and this is what we call the retina. So even here, you can see how they are shown, the retina, the sclera, and then still, this is just an internal structure to further clarify what's the difference between the choroid, the sclera, and the retina. Then moving on, if we look further, we said the choroid, it's the innermost layer. It is richly supplied with blood vessels. And then in front, this innermost layer becomes the ciliary body. This is what we call the ciliary body. It is just, it has ciliary muscles, and you'll learn later the function of the ciliary muscles. So it contains the ciliary muscles, and its function is to be able to change the shape of the lens. Remember this round or this oval shaped white part over here, this is what we call the lens. And when the lens changes its shape, it allows for a clear image to be formed. So the ciliary body with ciliary muscles, they also contribute in altering the shape of the lens. Then attached to the ciliary body is this bigger part here. Then attached there, you can see this lighter pink. You can see it at the top, see it at the bottom over here, this lighter pink part. This is what we call the suspensory ligaments. So the suspensory ligaments, together with the ciliary body, they play a role in altering the shape of the lens. They either slack or they become very taut. And when they do that, they pull on the lens, or they collapse so that the shape of the lens changes. And when that happens, the light rays are refracted differently. And when that happens, the image is then formed on the retina. And then that's the image that is sent onto the brain. So the function of the suspensory ligaments, we are saying it attaches the lens to the ciliary body, and it helps to alter the shape of the lens. Then here on the front part of the eye, we said this was the aqueous humor. And then there's this blue part that you see there. This is what we call the iris. Remember when we did the external, I said the iris is the colored part of the eye. It is blue, it is green, it is brown in other people. So this is what, oh, sorry. Now I'm pointing in the wrong place. So this line, it is not pointing at the iris, but it is pointing at this space between the two. So the iris is over there, but this is pointing, let me put a bracket here so that all of us can see. It is pointing at this gap between the two, or that is shown there, which is what we call the pupil. The pupil allows the light rays to enter the eye. So the pupil is the opening that is surrounded by the iris, and that is where the light enters the eye. So it is an opening in the iris that allows the light to enter the inner eye. And then this line now is the one that is pointing on the iris, on the blue part, the colored part. Then this colored part is, we can say it is a muscular structure because it is made up of the saccular muscles and the radial muscles. Saccular muscles, meaning they form a circle around the pupil. The pupil is here, and then the saccular muscles, they form a circle around. So it has saccular muscles. It also has the radial muscles. Radial muscles, remember the radius when you look at the circle, meaning from the center to the circumference. Those is what we call the radial muscles. So it is pigmented Pigmented meaning it is colorful. It can be green, it can be red, it can be brown, it can be blue. So it consists of inner rings called circular muscles and outer radial muscles. So what is the function of the iris? Is to control the size of the pupil, makes the pupil smaller, makes the pupil big, so that it allows the light to pass through. So the pupil can constrict, that is become smaller, or it can be wider. Then if it's wider, then it means more light can enter. If it's constricted, it means less light can enter the eye. Then we have this oval shaped structure, and this is what we call the lens. And the function of the lens, okay, it is an elastic, transparent biconcave structure, as you can see, and its function is that it refracts light and it focuses the light onto the retina, the inner layer. So if I go back to the previous slide, I said this part here, this is what we call the cornea. It is curved, it is transparent, and it refracts light. So that was the first part. So when the light approaches the eye or it enters the eye, it is first refracted here on the outside, on the cornea. And then as it goes through, yes, there's some refraction takes place, but then another structure which is going to play a major role in refraction light is the lens. So more light is being refracted here before it reaches the retina. So its function is to refract and is to focus the light onto the retina. Then on the retina, still there on the innermost layer, the yellow part, you can see that there is this dent over here, this part over here that is a little bit dented. This is what we call the yellow spot or fovea centralis, but you'll just be fine if you know this word, the yellow spot. So in the yellow spot, that is where the clearest image is formed in the eye. Why? Because it only has the cones. It is the site for clear vision because that is where the cones are found. Remember we said there's rods and cones, and those are photoreceptors. So this one is mainly having the cones, which are responsible for the colored. Remember, they work best in bright colors, whereas the rods work best in dim colors. So for the cones, they are highly concentrated in this region, and this helps for the clear image or the clear vision to be formed. And then we have this part, this also dented, and it sort of leaves the eye. This now is what we call the blind spot. So there's two spots, the yellow spot where the clear image is formed because there's more cones there. Then the blind spot, blind, the word blind, there are no photoreceptors at all in this part of the eye. There are no photoreceptors, and the fact that there are no photoreceptors, it means that no vision, no image is formed on this part of the eye. So no vision occurs here. So if you come across a question that will tell you that you will be asked, what happens if the light rays fall on the blind spot? Your answer would be, there won't be a vision that is formed there. And if you are asked why, it is because this part of the eye does not have photoreceptors. Then we have this part now, this whole part where it's sort of the back of the eye. This is what we call the optic nerve. So the optic nerve runs through here. This is the nerve that takes the impulses to the brain. Remember we said when the light enters, it goes through the cornea, it goes through the pupil, it goes through the aqueous humor to the lens, and then it goes through the vitreous humor at the back up until it falls onto the retina. And then we said the retina has photoreceptors. Their function is to convert the light stimuli into the impulse. So once it falls onto here, then that impulse will be carried by the optic nerve into the brain, into the cerebrum of the brain, and that is where interpretation is going to take place. So we've covered the different parts of the eye. Just to recap so that we understand, we are going to look at a few questions on the parts of the eye before we go into the functioning, how the eye functions. So what you need to remember is that we are looking at the three layers, the sclera, the choroid, the retina. When you look at the front part of the eye, we're looking at the cornea, which is the part of the sclera, but it's transparent. It allows the light to pass through. It is curved. The fact that it is curved, it is responsible for refraction of light. So when it enters and then it goes through the pupil which we said it is the this opening on the iris, and then it goes onto the lens. Then from the lens, it goes and falls onto the innermost layer, which is the retina. And the retina is the one that is filled with photoreceptors. That's where the image is formed. So this question says, the diagram below represents the structure of the human eye. So we can all see that this is the human eye, cross-section, the longitudinal section of the human eye. And then the question is, give the letter and the name of the part which. So what is important here? The question says, give the letter and the name, which is why you see that there's 2 marks, 2 marks, 2 marks for each. So you give the letter and you give the name. So the first question says, this part regulates the amount of light entering the eye. So the part that regulates the amount of light entering the eye, if you remember very well when I was explaining on the previous slide, we said there is this part that has the radial, the circular muscles and the radial muscles. Which part is that? We said that part is the iris. So the correct answer for 1.1 would be B, and the answer is iris. So let's see. Yes, it's B, iris. The question said it regulates the amount. So it controls the amount of light that enters the eye. The question did not say the part that allows the light to pass through. So you cannot say it's the pupil, because the pupil does not regulate, but what actually it contributes to it, but what actually controls the size of the pupil in order for it to make to allow more or less light to come through is the iris in this diagram. Because again, when you look at this diagram, there is no label pointing on to the pupil. So that is why your answer is the iris. There's no label pointing onto the pupil here. Then the second question says, the part that supplies food and oxygen on the eye. Remember with the 3 layers that we discussed earlier, the outer layer which holds and maintains the shape of the eye, then the middle layer that we said it's because it's got lots of blood vessels. That is why it's even dark in color. It's darkly pigmented so that it helps in the absorption of light, prevents the reflection of light. At the same time, it supplies the eye with nutrients and oxygen. We said that part is, in this case, and when you look at the diagram, that part would be B, and it would be the choroid. So let's look, yes. So the answer is D, and it is the choroid. Then the next question says, this part transmit impulses to the brain. Remember, we said once the stimuli is converted into an impulse, and then that impulse, or it is then taken into the cerebrum of the brain for further interpretation. And that part we said is E. It should be E, which is the optic nerve. So let's look at the answer. Yes, it's E, and it is the optic nerve. The number 4, they say the part that contains cones and is the area of the clearest vision. Remember, I said there's a part where this clearest vision is formed, and we said that part is C, and we call it the yellow spot or the fovea. And then lastly, this part assists in the refraction of light rays. There's 2 things that we mentioned that refract light. We said it's the cornea, and we said it is the lens. So when we look into this diagram, there is no label on the lens. So we only have one part to mention here, and that part is what? Is A, and it is the cornea. So the part that we are talking about for 1.1.5 is A, the cornea. But if there was a label pointing at this part, which is the lens, maybe the question would have been saying the part that causes most refraction, or the one that causes most refraction is is A, which is the cornea. So you see how easy it is to get the marks on the eye. If you know the different parts of the eye, if you know the function already, you've collected 10 marks here out of 150, and you're already moving in the right direction. So let's look at another activity still on the eye. This one is still the diagram that represents the structure of the human eye. You can all see this is the human eye, longitudinal section. So here, I always say that it is important that when you get any diagram, any structure, any question with a diagram, graph, or whatever, you look into the diagram, you underline, you highlight, you can even put labels here before you go to your questions, because then it's easy for you to answer the questions because you already know what the diagram is all about. So when we look at this, we can easily label the sclera, the cornea, the C is pointing at the pupil, D is pointing at the iris, E is pointing at the ciliary muscle, then we're looking at the J pointing at the suspensory ligaments, G is the lens. So you put the labels, then you know when the questions comes, it will be easy to answer the question. So the first question says, name the paths in the correct sequence through which the light passes in order to reach structure H. So what is structure H? First, we need to identify what structure H is. There is H, and when we look at what H is, it is pointing at the inner layer of the eye, and H, according to this diagram, is the retina, the inner layer of the eye. So the question says we must mention the letter, we must mention the name for the different paths through which the light passes through until it gets to H, and for 3 marks. So if we look at this diagram, we can start by saying B will be the first part, because B is pointing at what? At the cornea. So it's B, cornea, and then the next structure I would say, so this would be our structure number 1, and then structure number 2, I would say it's C, the pupil, because remember, once it passes the cornea and then it goes through the pupil, that's part number 2, which is, I said, it's the pupil. And then the third part would say it's G, which is what? Which is the lens. And then from here, then it will strike on to H. So we said it's B, cornea, C, the pupil, and G, lens. So let's see what the answer is. Okay, we were correct. Light has to pass through B, which is the cornea. It has to pass through C, which is the pupil, and it has to pass through G, which is the lens. And this is where the allocation of mark is. Note that there is no allocation of marks for H, because the question says in order to reach structure H. So it's only the 3 parts that are important here. Then 2.2 says, explain the consequences if the light rays were to fall on part F. Remember, we talked about 2 parts that are sort of dented. The first part, we said it has mostly the cornea. There's a high concentration of cornea in that part. And then we said in that part, that is where the clearest vision or the clearest image is formed. Then we said there's another part where there is no image formed there at all, because we said on that part there are no photoreceptors, there are no rods, there are no cones. So the question says, explain the consequences if the light rays were to fall on F. So if you go to our diagram, F, that's where F is, and F is pointing at the blind spot. So if the light rays were to fall on this point exactly, we are saying that there will be no vision, or there will be no image formed. And the reason being that is because this part of the eye does not have photoreceptors, so no vision will be formed there. Remember, when you explain, you provide the cause and you provide the effect. So thus there will be no vision, and why what effect would having no vision formed? I mean, the effect in this case is that there are no photoreceptors in the blind spot. And what effect would that have? There would be no vision formed. So there are no photoreceptors, therefore no vision formed. So let's look at the answer. The answer says no receptors present, like we have said, therefore no image will be formed, cannot see the object, and light will not be converted into an impulse, because we said the photoreceptors are important because they convert the light rays into an impulse. So no receptors, no image formed, therefore no conversion of the light stimulus into an impulse. Then moving on, the diagram below represents the structure of the human eye. Still a continuation of the question that we did before. So here now the question says, explain 2 ways in which the lens is structurally suited to perform its function. How is the lens structurally suited to perform its function? So what we mentioned in the functions, we said the lens is elastic, it is transparent, it is elastic. So being transparent, we are saying it is able to allow the light to pass through, and it being elastic, it has the ability to alter its shape, and when it does that, it refracts the light so that a clear vision is formed, or so that there is clear vision. So let's look at the 2 ways that the memo is providing us. So there's actually 3 options there, but if the max is 4, we mark the first 4. So the first one says it's the fact that it is elastic. So because it is elastic, it can change its shape or its convexity, that is to allow for accommodation. Accommodation you will learn about in the next session of today's session. So accommodation is when the lens is able to change its shape so that clear vision is formed. And then 2, we are saying the lens is transparent. So the fact that it is transparent, we said it allows the light rays to pass through. So this is transparent, therefore it allows the light rays to pass through. Then lastly, we are told that the lens is biconvex. It is a biconvex structure. It looks like this. And because it's biconvex, it is able to refract light rays. Remember, when we talk about refraction, it's when the light rays bend depending on the structure that they strike on. When they go through an object, when they strike the object, it changes direction, it bends, and then that bending of the light allows us to have a clear vision, allows for a clear vision to fall on the yellow spot. It allows for a correct interpretation in the brain, and then you are able to see what is in front of you. So then this is the second activity. Looking at activity number 3, the diagram below represents the structure of the human eye. Before I look at this question, see how many questions we have done already. We're just looking at the part of the eye, nothing else. So it is an indication to you also when you study that when we say do as many questions as we can, we are showing you how to do as many questions as you can. Because now this allows you to see how questions are asked. You can also pick up that it's more or less the same. The pattern is the same. You will be asked, what is the part? What is the function? Or explain why this part can do this. So those are the type of questions that you can expect. So that builds your knowledge. It also builds your confidence. But when you get there into an exam room, you know exactly how you're going to answer questions that are related to this diagram or this part that you have studied. So when you look into this, still the same diagram, just represented differently here, or different labels are shown here. So when you look into this diagram, it says it's a diagram structure of the human eye, and they tell you that it's the structure of the human eye. So you don't have to guess, what is this that I'm looking for? You are looking at the structure of the eye. So the question says, identify parts C, D, and H. So we look at the diagram. I did say you can put all the labels on the diagram so that when you get to the questions, it is easy to answer. So when we look at the diagram, we are asked to identify part C, part D, and part H. So let's go to our diagram and try and identify. Here is C, D, and H is over there. So when you look at C, C is pointing at the space between, you can see it's just up there. I'm going to use the pen so that you all see. It's pointing at that. And that, according to the diagram, that is the pupil. So part C will say is the pupil. And then D is pointing at the part that I said it's the colored part of the eye, the pigmented part of the eye, different colors. And this is what we call the iris. So D in this case would be the iris. Then the other label is pointing at H. H is this what holds the lens, what alters the shape of the lens. This is what H is pointing at. And this is what we call the suspensory ligament. So let's look at the answers. C is the pupil, D is the iris, and H are suspensory ligaments. So here, because we are not asked to give the part and the function, and the name, only the part we asked, so it's 3 marks. Then the second part says, explain how part B is adapted to perform its function. So where is part B in the diagram? There is part B. Part B is pointing on this transparent part of the eye that is in front, and we said that is the cornea, the continuation of the sclera, which is called the cornea. It is transparent, number 1, so meaning it allows light to pass through. So that's how it is adapted. 2, it is curved. So being curved, what does it do? It refracts the light ray so that a clear vision is formed. So let's see, how is the cornea adapted to its function? Yes, the cornea, the first thing is that we are told it is transparent, then it allows the light to pass through. You explain how adapted. So your answer cannot end here at it is transparent, because it is transparent, and then so what? You need to tell us it is transparent, therefore it can do this. So in this case, it is transparent, therefore it allows light to pass through. The second thing about the cornea is that it is curved. It is curved, and when it is curved, it allows for the refraction of light. And that's the 2 marks. You see the 2 marks, the mark is at the end. You provided the cause and you've provided the effect. You've given the cause and you've given the effect. Then you get 1 mark, 1 mark. And then the next question is on the same diagram. Now you are asked to provide the functions of E and G respectively. So if you go into the diagram looking for E and G, and E is over there and G is over there. E is pointing at the innermost layer and G is pointing at the layer in the middle. Remember, 3 layers out, middle, inner. So E is pointing at I think you've already answered. If you're watching, it is pointing at the retina. And then G is pointing at the middle layer, and the middle layer, we said it's the choroid. So the question says provide the functions. Then the retina, we said that's where the photoreceptors are found. That is where the light stimuli is converted into what? Into an impulse. And then G, which is the choroid, we said it's as blood vessels, so it supplies the eye with the nutrients, it supplies the eye with oxygen, and it is darkly pigmented, so it prevents the reflection of what? Of light. So let's see what the memo says. So it says E contains rods and cones which are receptors sensitive to light. So these allow for an image to form. Yes, which is correct. And then G, pigments absorb the excess light to prevent reflection, and blood vessels are what they supply oxygen and nutrients. So it's darkly pigmented so that it absorbs excess light and prevents reflection, and the blood vessels supply oxygen and nutrients. Then the next question says, write down the letter only the letter only for the part that is able to change the shape to refract light. So which part we said changes its shape so that the light is refracted? It is not the cornea, because the cornea is fixed, can't change its shape. We said the lens, the iris, the only thing that it does is to control the size of the pupil. So what changes the shape is this part F, which is the lens. Because of the suspensory ligaments and the ciliary body, it can change its shape to refract light. So the answer should be F. Okay, it is F. And then provide structural support or the part that provides structural support to the eyeball. We said that part that provides structural support to the eyeball, we said it's the sclera because it is tough, it is inelastic. So it's A. So the answer for this question is A. I hope we are still together, and I hope now you see how easy it is to study the eye and answer the different questions that you get. Then the last, I think this is the last activity. If it's not the last, we'll stop here and so that you allow for the next session to commence. So this one says the diagram below represent the structure of the human eye again. So different parts, as you can see. And now we're looking at the questions. So the first question says identify part C. We go to the diagram, looking at part C, and see there part C is pointing here. That's where part C is. So if you look at part C, it is pointing at the middle layer. And I think by now you know what that middle layer is. You have already answered. That middle layer is the choroid. So let's see. Yes, that's the middle layer. And then the next question says give one function of part E. So where is E? E is over here. And E is pointing at this part. And this part, we said it's the suspensory ligaments. So the question is, state one function of part E. So part E, we said what it does, it controls the shape of the lens. So it can slack, it can be taut, and when it does that, it controls the shape of the lens. So let's see, it holds the lens in position, number one. It holds the lens in position. It connects the lens. It connects the lens to the ciliary body, and then it plays the role in accommodation. Accommodation when the lens changes its shape for clear vision. Then state why the clearest image is will form when the light rays fall on part D. Part D, same question. It's a yellow spot. There's a high concentration of cones there. So when you state why, it's because there's high concentration of cones there. Therefore, that is why there will be the clearest image. And then the last question, explain one way in which part B is structurally different from part F. We're looking at part B. Where is B? B is the outside layer, it's the sclera, and F is the lens. So the difference between the two is the sclera is inelastic, the lens is elastic. The lens is transparent, the sclera is not. So let's see if what I'm saying is correct. Yes. Sclera is opaque. It does not allow light to pass through. And F is transparent. It allows the light to pass through. So it's not transparent, so it cannot allow light to pass through this. The lens is transparent, it allows light to pass through. Two, we can say the sclera is non-elastic. It maintains the shape of the eye, whereas the lens is elastic, and it's able to change its shape. But what you must note here is that the 2 marks are allocated on one way in which is structurally different. So you are only expected to mention something about the structure, not the function. We are not asked the adaptation, but how is it structurally different? So sclera is opaque, lens is transparent. It's not transparent, is transparent. The sclera is non-elastic and the lens is elastic. So we are not going to look into this. I'm looking at the time. And then we'll just jump onto the last part, which is what we call binocular vision. So this is where we start looking at the functioning of the eye. So what is binocular vision? When we talk of binocular vision, we're talking about the ability of the eye or the ability to focus on the object with both eyes, creating a single image. So if you're looking at something, you are able to see that single image. If it's a book, if it's a person, whatever you're looking at, you are able to see it in one image. So the fact that you have 2 eyes, you don't see 2 things, but you see one image because they work together to produce that one image. So why is that possible? It's because they are placed some distance apart, and this creates the ability to observe 2 separate images. But then these two separate images, they combine to form one image that is 3-dimensional, and that's how the images are presented. So why is it important? Why is binocular vision important? Because then we are able to have a field of view. Like I can see what is behind, what is in front, what is on the side of the object that I'm looking at. And it also gives the precise depth perception, like how far the distance, the object is, or how closer the object is to me. So binocular vision is what helps us to walk, to jump, to run, walk up the stairs, to do all those activities, because we are using two eyes to focus on the object. We were going to do an activity, but I'm looking at the time. It's an activity that you can do on your own. I think your teachers have already done this with you. When you take two pencils and you hold them at arm's length, and then if we want to demonstrate binocular vision. So if you are using both eyes and you try to have the tips of the two pencils touching. So with both eyes, it's supposed to be easy. So if I bring my two pens together, they touch, because two eyes working so that a single image is formed. But if I close one eye, now I'm closing one eye, and then I'll try and do this, bring the two pens together so that the tips touch. You see, it's not as easy as when two eyes are opened. I need to be very careful, maybe move a little bit slow. Still, it does not touch, but this is just a demonstration of binocular vision. We've come to the end of the first part of today's session. Then Fozi is going to take you to functioning of the eye, and then we'll also do more questions on that. Thank you very much.
afternoon, grade 12 learners. My name is Fawzi Rahman, and I'm going to continue teaching you about this amazing organ of ours called the eye. Thank you to Nonhlanhla for your presentation on the structure and functions on the various parts of the eye. I am going to continue with how these structures function together to bring about two important processes that occur in our eye that enable us to see. I am also going to tell you about the defects of the eye and how we correct those defects. The first process that we're going to learn about is called accommodation. Accommodation is the focusing of light on the retina. And this happens by changing the shape of the lens. Now remember, the lens is convex, right? This is a convex lens. So when you speak about accommodation, when we speak about accommodation, we are speaking about distant and near vision. So how does our eye focus? It focuses on changing the lens for near and for distant vision. So for near vision, remember our eye, the lens of our eye, the shape of the lens is convex, right? So when we are focusing on near and distant vision, you need to know, or you need to say that the lens becomes less convex or more convex. I'm going to try and get onto my previous slide. Okay, there we go. So this is what I was saying. It's the focusing of light on the retina. And how do we mammals focus? We focus by changing the shape of our lens. And by changing the shape of our lens, we can focus onto the retina, which remember is like a screen, as Nonhlanhla said. So here we say that the lens is less convex for distant objects and it is more convex for near objects. So now let's look at how we're going to focus our lens on a near or a distant object. So when an object is less than 6 meters away, less than 6 meters away means that the object is near, okay? So when the object is near or close by, then the ciliary muscles contract. Remember, Nonhlanhla spoke to you about the ciliary muscles. The ciliary muscles contract and the sclera is pulled forward. The suspensory ligaments slacken, or you could say loosen, and tension on the lens decreases. The lens becomes more convex. So I'm going to show you the next slide where we're going to see a diagram on how this works. The lens becomes more convex and the refractive power of the lens increases and we get a clear image on the retina, which is the screen at the back of our eyes. For far vision, the opposite is true. What do we mean by far vision? When we are looking at an object more than 6 meters away. So near vision, you may be looking at a book and then you look out into the distant, out the window, and that is far vision. There, again, the muscles involved are the ciliary muscles. So the ciliary muscles will relax. The sclera is then pulled backward. The suspensory ligaments become taut or tight. Tension on the lens increases and the lens becomes less convex. The refractive power of the lens decreases and a clear image is formed on the retina. So what was I telling you about? This is what I was saying. So if you look at this diagram shows us the suspensory ligaments. Here you can see the suspensory ligaments are taut here, right? They are taut or they are tight. And that sort of pulls the lens and makes the lens less convex. When the lens is less convex, you can focus on this diagram. When the lens is less convex, you can see that the light rays are bending, but the refraction of the light is less. That means the light is bending less and a clear image forms on the retina. So this is the diagram here then that shows us when we are focusing on vision that is far away. That is this diagram that is here. So here we can see that the lens is less convex, light is moving along, and the light is bending less, and a clear image is forming on the structure here at the back of the eye here, which is the retina. Now, when we look at a vision that is nearby, so if you're looking at a book, right? Here you're looking at a book, what happens is the suspensory ligaments slacken or they loosen, right? And it's not pulling on the lens. Remember, the lens is elastic. So now this is not pulling onto the lens. Therefore, the lens is more convex. When the lens is more convex, you can see that this is what it does with the second diagram here. It is bending the light more. That means the refractive power of the lens increases because it is bending the light more. And if you look at this diagram here, you can see that the refractive power, the lens is more convex. It is bending the light more than in the first diagram, and a clear image falls onto the retina. So this is for near vision, and when it is taught, it is for distant vision. So let's move on. We're moving on now to the next part of the eye, which you need to know about, the next process of the eye, which is called pupillary mechanism or a pupillary reflex. Now remember, it's a reflex because you are not, if somebody comes to hit you, it's a natural reflex for you to just close your eye, right? Or if there's too much of light, then your eye will adjust accordingly. So that is not you are doing it. It is something that is happening automatically. Therefore, it is a reflex. And the mechanism by which this occurs is called pupillary mechanism. Okay, now let's look at how this occurs. So firstly, the iris. Remember, Nonhlanhla spoke to you about the iris, and she said it is the pigmented part of the eye. It could be blue, it could be green or brown. And this iris controls the amount of light that enters the eye by controlling the aperture or the pupil, right? So the pupil is what allows light to enter, and the iris controls how much of light enters by controlling the size of the pupil. So as you can see here, during bright light, the pupil is small. During average light, the pupil is a little bit larger. And dim light, when there's not enough light and you're battling to try and see, you will find that the pupil is much larger. Right, so how does our eye function? So let's look at bright light. Now, when we look at bright light, right, the circular muscles of the iris contract. Now, the iris is made up of circular and radial muscles. So what do I mean by circular and radial muscles? If you think of a circle, right, and there's the point in the center, so we'll make it a little circle, so that looks like it's our pupil. And then the radial muscles are muscles that radiate out from the center, from that point, very similar to the radius of a circle. So that those are radial muscles. They radiate outwards from a point and very similar to the radius. Right? The circular muscles of the eye, the circular muscles are the structure like this. These are circular muscles, right? Although mine don't look very much like a proper circle, but they are in your eye, they are circular. So these ones are the circular muscles. Right. So the circular muscles of the eye contract, the radial muscles relax, the pupil constricts or becomes smaller, and the amount of light entering the eye is reduced, or I like to say less light enters the eye, so that I can make this little key that helps me remember. So when in bright light, I know CC for circular muscles contract, RR radial muscles relax, PC pupil constricts, and when the pupil constricts or becomes smaller, less light enters the eye. So you can see it here, right? The radial muscles are relaxing. Think of a radius for circle, and the pupil becomes smaller. Let's look now at dim light. The opposite is true for dim light. So it's nice to learn one of them, and in the exam, when you are reading your questions, is to work out what we are trying to say, what the examiner is trying to say, because not always do you get a question that says, explain how an image is formed in dim light or bright light. It may be more difficult the way the question is asked in the exam. So you need to work out what is being asked here: near vision, far, dim, or bright light. And it's nice to learn them and write it down on the side of your question paper. Remember, that's your question paper. You can make use of it and write it down. So then you work out, okay, this is what it is in dim light and in maybe near or far vision. Learn one of them. And then the opposite is true for the other one. So the circular muscles of the iris relax. And again, I'm going to show you the circular muscles. These of the iris relax. And then the radial muscles will contract, and the pupil dilates, or in other words, becomes bigger. The pupil dilates or becomes bigger, and then more light enters the eye, right? Because the amount of light entering the eye is reduced. So then more light enters the eye. And here you can learn this mnemonic CR, RC, PD, and ML for more light. But if you learn the other one, then you know that if you learn for bright light, then you know that this would be, for dim light, will just be the opposite. So when I say opposite, here we'll say circular muscles relax, radial muscles contract, pupil dilates, more light enters. Okay, it'll just be the opposite of this one here. Okay, so these are the two processes that you need to learn for the exam, and you need to learn them thoroughly because many pupils get confused in what we are asking in the exam. They get confused whether it is pupillary mechanism, and they get confused whether it is accommodation. So this is a slide to show you how you need to remember, right? So when we look at the difference between the two, accommodation and pupillary mechanism, the stimulus for accommodation is distance, right? So we're looking at D for distance there, right? The stimulus is distance. So I'm looking at something far away. And for pupillary mechanism, it is light. Okay, so light is the stimulus for the pupil to become bigger or smaller, and for accommodation to focus onto the retina, that is for near or for distant vision. Now, the parts that are involved. When you look at accommodation, when we are looking at accommodation, remember your lens is elastic. It has to focus now, become less convex or more convex, depending whether you are looking nearby or you're looking far away. And your eye has to accommodate to make sure that the light focuses onto the retina and gives a clear image. So the lens is involved, and the suspensory ligaments and ciliary muscles. When we are talking about pupillary mechanism, that is light, when there's too much or too little light, then in this case, it's the pupil. And with the pupil, remember, the pupil is controlled by the iris, and the iris has radial and circular muscles. So you need to learn this slide thoroughly so that you know the difference between the two and you don't mix up circular and ciliary, because this is what you guys do in the exams, right? You are stressed, you understand, and you're not sure whether it's circular or ciliary. So you need to learn this well and understand it. So if you're understanding, you're not going to guess. You know it's accommodation, it's ciliary. You know it is pupil. Think of the pupil as a circle. Think of circular and radial as part of the circle, so the radius and the circular muscles, and then find a way of remembering so that you don't make a mistake in the exam. What happens? The main changes. The shape of the lens changes during accommodation because it's elastic. The diameter of the pupil changes when it's pupillary mechanism, and that diameter is controlled by the iris, which is the radial and circular muscles, as I said above. Right, what brings about these changes? It's the suspensory ligaments and the ciliary muscles in accommodation, suspensory ligaments and ciliary muscles, and in pupillary mechanism, it's radial muscles and circular muscles. So please make sure you understand that. Your teachers will get a copy of this slide. It's nice to make a photocopy of this and stick it where you're always looking, like the mirror where you're always looking. So that's where you will put that. Okay, so that whenever you look at the mirror, you will see this, and eventually it will become part, you'll know it very well. Okay, so now we're going to look at some activities, right? And we're going to look at this at the typical kind of questions that are asked in the exam. So the first one. Right, the first one says this diagram represents the structure of the human eye. Please read what is above the diagram. What we tend to do is, learners, we don't read and then we go straight into the question. So, oh, that came up again. So, okay, doesn't matter. So it says here, nocturnal animals sleep during the day and are active at night. Explain how part B of nocturnal animals. So part B is, we're going to look there. Part B is the pupil. How it will differ from that of animals found who are active during the day. So now, if you are active at night, you need to see more clearly at night because there's no sunlight. So that will explain why the pupil, or part B, will have to dilate more to allow more light to enter, right? So can you see, because it says explain, there are 2 ticks there for 2 marks. So you don't say the pupil can dilate or the pupil can become bigger. You need to explain why the pupil becomes bigger to allow more light to enter the eye, okay? Then we look at part C. This is part C here at the back. Of nocturnal animals will differ from that found in animals that are active during the day. So let's look at this. Nocturnal animals, they are active at night. That means they need to see at night. So how will this part C differ? What is part C? Part C, remember we said, is the retina. It has photoreceptors. Okay, part C is the retina. It has photoreceptors, rods, and cones. Now, remember we said that this part here, the fovea, has more cones because cones are for clear vision, but rods now, on the other hand, are for dim vision. So maybe the retina now, we have to look to see maybe it has more rods so that we are able to see better in dim light because we are nocturnal. So let's see what that will do. Right, the retina has more rods, enabling them to see, enabling the animals to see in dim light. And then the last one, describe how the iris controls the amount of light entering the eye when a person is exposed to bright light. Again, remember we said bright light. So when it is bright light, then we know that the radial muscles will relax. Okay, and what else will happen? What are the muscles involved firstly? It's the radial muscles and it is the circular muscles, because we're talking about pupillary mechanism and we're speaking about light. The circular muscles of the iris contract, the pupil constricts, and less light will enter the eye. Okay, I hope you got that right, learners. Okay, let's look now at the next activity. And remember the 4 marks, and there you can see where the 4 ticks are, and that will give you the 4 marks. Right, so the next activity, this tells us to study the diagram, the following diagram of the eye. Right, number 1, name the parts in the correct sequence through which light passes in order to reach structure H. So mention the letter from the diagram and the name. So then again, remember as Nonhlanhla said, we are talking here about the letter and the name. We are speaking here about 2 parts. Therefore, the marks are going to be doubled. Okay? So now, light has to pass through. Remember, the front part of the eye is transparent. That means it allows light to pass through. So the first part, the light is entering through. It's entering through here to the front. It has to pass the first initial part there. Right? So let's see. Oopsie. Right. Okay, light has to pass through part B, that is the cornea, and then light must go through the pupil, which is part C, and then light must pass through this lens here, which is part G, and then an image can be focused onto the retina. Okay? Right, the next one says, describe the changes that occur in the structures labeled E and G. There we've got E here, right? And we've got G here. So we're talking about G, the lens, and E, which is the ciliary body. So describe the changes that occur in these structures and J when focusing on a bird that is flying off into the distance. So you see, now we're speaking about a bird flying off into the distance. So previously I said you're looking out the window and you're looking at something far away, right? But now the clue here is distance. Okay, so we're saying the bird is flying off into the distance. So we're speaking about distance here. When we're speaking about distance, immediately you must, a bell must ring in your head to say, okay, distance, I'm speaking about accommodation. If it is accommodation, what are the muscles involved, right? It's accommodation, therefore it's the ciliary muscles, okay? And it's the suspensory ligaments. Okay, so let's see how that is going to function. The ciliary muscles, okay, I'm just going to get an eraser here to try and erase what I have written. Oh, okay. Okay, the ciliary muscles relax, right? The ciliary body goes back to the normal position or moves backwards. There's tension on J, right? And that is the suspensory ligaments, and the tension increases, causing them to become taut or tight, pulling on the lens, right? The lens becomes less convex. Remember, if you say convex, we don't mark that right because the shape of the lens is convex already. The lens becomes less convex, and we tend to move away from talking about round, right? Let's stick to learning the correct words. So in the exam, you use the proper words and you're not penalized. So let's stick to convex, okay? And the refractive power of the lens is thus decreased. Remember, I showed you the bending of the light is less because you're looking at a distant object. So thereby the bending of the light is less. It means the refractive power of the lens has decreased and a clear image forms, and therefore the clear image of the bird forms onto your retina, and then you can see that. Okay, now we're looking at with reference to structures labeled A and B. So now we're looking at A and B. We are looking at here A, the suspensory ligaments, and B, we are looking at the lens. So with reference to that, so you need to mention that in the exam as A or B, or you can say the name. You can say A, the suspensory ligaments, and B, the lens. With reference to the structures labeled A and B, explain the accommodation that will take place when a person is viewing an object close to him. So immediately, we are talking about an object close, accommodation. Immediately, you must understand we're speaking about distance. If we're speaking about distance, we're speaking about suspensory ligaments. So let's look at this answer. The suspensory ligaments slacken or become less taut. Tension on the lens decreases and the lens becomes more convex, and the refractive power of the lens is less because now we're looking at an object that is close up. We did the activity on the bird when the bird was far away. Now we're looking at an object close up, maybe a book or a pen in front of you. So now the suspensory ligaments will slacken and the tension on the lens decreases. So the lens becomes more convex. The refractive power of the lens increases and the image then focuses on the retina. And here there are 1, 2, 3, 4 marks, but any 3 marks in this case you will be credited for if you mention. Okay, now it's the same diagram, but now we're moving on to looking at diagram 2. So now we are asking you what is happening in diagram 2. If you look at diagram 2, what can you see? The first one, you can see the diagram on the left-hand side. You can see that the pupil is small. And then when you look at the next diagram, the pupil is much larger. So now we are looking at the pupil. So then we are talking about the pupil, therefore we're speaking about light. And if we're speaking about light, the two muscles involved then are the pupil is round, remember? So then we're speaking about circular and radial. So then you can explain the pupil is going from small to big, right? So you need to understand in the exam what is happening. So from small, it's going to big. If it is small, you need to work out. That means there is a lot of light because the pupil is small to protect your eye and to protect the retina, not to allow too much of light to go in. When the pupil becomes larger, it means the light is dim. That's why the pupil is opening up to allow more light to enter in. So we're moving from bright light, we're moving to dim light. So you're going to explain now what is happening in dim light conditions. So in dim light conditions, again, as I said, we're speaking about radial muscles. They contract, circular muscles relax, the pupil dilates or becomes bigger, and the amount of light entering the eye is increased, or more light enters the eye. We're going to move on now to defects of the eye, right? This is another section that you have to know that is on the exam, in the exam guidelines. And we're looking here at short-sightedness or problems seeing objects that are far away, right? So that means you are short-sighted. It means you can see close by, but you can't see objects that are far away. Therefore, you are short-sighted, and the other name is myopia. So what happens here? The distance between the lens, right, there's your lens here, and your retina, right, is too large, or the eyeball is too long. That is the problem that is experienced, okay? And then light is focused in front of the retina. So there's the retina here, if you can see the retina as the screen. And there is the image here. There's the image focused here. So what we are saying is that the light focused here is too short because the image is not falling on the retina. Therefore, you can't see clearly. That is what short-sightedness is all about. Right? How do you correct this? With a diverging lens that will then try and give more length to the light, and then the object focuses onto the retina. So let's look at what I'm talking about. So we are using a concave lens to correct the problem and focus the image onto the retina. So there's it here, right? This is the problem. In the first diagram, you are looking at what the problem is, that the eyeball is too long. It's focusing the image before the retina, not on the retina. Therefore, you cannot see clearly, right? You can see very blurred vision. Now you will use a concave. Another name for a concave is a divergent lens because it's diverging, right? Remember, it's diverging the light rays. So that is diverging the light rays, and then it is focusing, then the lens focuses the light onto the retina, so then you can see clearly. So that is what short-sightedness or nearsightedness is. Long-sightedness, the other name is hyperopia, is problem seeing objects close. That means when you look at some object far away, you can see very clearly, but when the object is close by, you cannot see clearly. Okay, so this is what's happening. You can see here that the image is forming forms beyond or after the retina, not on the retina. So there's your retina here, and we expect to see the image here, but there's the image here. This is the image forming there. So it means that the distance between the lens and the retina is too long, or the eyeball is too short. That is the problem, right? So the light is focused behind the retina. So what happens? It's harder for people to read as they age, right? And the lens loses elasticity and cannot become convex enough or more convex to focus the light onto the retina. And this is corrected by converging or convex lenses. So this is long-sightedness, right? You're trying to look at the object, you can't see it nearby, so you put the paper far away, hoping that you will be able to see it, and it looks blurred like in the second diagram here. Okay, I think we are stuck here, so we're going to take a 30-second break just to get this slide that is frozen, unfrozen, and I'll be back right now.
Believe in yourself. Believe a little more in yourself, because to those that believe, nothing is impossible. You have done this before. You have passed your tests before. You have went into a higher grade before. It is possible because you have done it before. Do not doubt yourself. Keep believing in yourself. Keep pushing, because this can be done and you can be great.
So we were looking at long-sightedness, and we said the other name for long-sightedness is hyperopia, right? But you can learn long-sightedness, it's fine. The other name is far-sightedness. So here we can see that, looking at the top diagram here, you can see that the image is focused after or beyond the retina. So what do? Is we get a convex lens, right? And remember, a convex lens, the more convex it is, the lens is, it increases the refractive power. So it's going to bend the light more, thus bringing this image that is formed here at the back, bringing it onto the retina here. And that's what happens in your diagram. At the bottom, a convex lens or a biconvex lens, meaning that both sides are sort of rounded to give the convex shape, and that leads to correct the problem. Okay, the other disease we're talking about is astigmatism. Astigmatism is, it's like as if you are looking through, in bathrooms, normally you have sintered glass where there's the glass is not clear, not a smooth glass. So that is the same kind of thing. It focuses images so you can see through, but it's blurred. And the same thing happens with astigmatism, right? Light is passing through, but because the cornea is irregular, its focus is not creating one clear focus onto the retina. It's creating many focus points, and that's what causes a blurred image to form, right? As it says here, multiple focal points, and a blurred image forms, so you can't really see clearly. And if you're looking at this bridge, you can see with normal vision, you can see the bridge is quite clear here, right? But here you can see double. So it's sort of blurry, okay? So this is due to astigmatism, and this one here is normal vision. Right, so here the eye cannot focus on an object's image on a single point, and the cornea is oval, right? The curvature is irregular. It's not a smooth cornea. So it causes blurred vision. And some types of astigmatism can be corrected with using lenses. Okay? The other disease is called a cataract. Now, you need to understand here, right, what a cataract is. Cataract forms a clouding on the lens. Now, guys, the focus point here is the lens. When we had this question 1 year in the exam, learners were speaking about clouding of the cornea, clouding of the pupil, right? They were giving all these answers, and it was marked wrong because the cataract is clouding of the lens. So please remember that, due to the denaturing of the lens protein, and this happens as we get older. So it obstructs the passage of light. Imagine something in front of your lens. Obviously, it's going to cause a blockage, right? And a blurry vision will not be clear. So it's caused by age, chronic exposure to UV rays, could be trauma, right? And it is removed by surgery. Okay, so we're going to look at one activity now that talks about visual defects, okay? The table below indicates a percentage of visually impaired people in the world suffering from different kinds of effects, and let's look at it now. So when you are given a data response question like this, you are given data and you need now to respond to this. It is very important that you read whatever you are given very, very carefully. So let's look at this, right? We have visual defects and percentage of people that have this defect. At the bottom, the defects are listed, and on the right-hand side, the percentage of people having these defects are listed. So let's see what the question says. So we unpacked the data now. Now let's look at what the question is asking us. Which visual defect in the table is most common among the world population? So if we are looking at this, right, the first one we are seeing blindness is 2, long-sightedness is 64, short-sightedness 30, and all the others is 4. So obviously the first diagram will tell us immediately that we are looking here at 64. So that is the highest, right? So the one that is most common in the world's population is long-sightedness. In some cases where people are blind, the condition is caused by cataract. Explain why people with cataracts become blind. Now remember we said cataract. What is cataract? Cataract is the clouding of the lens. The lens becomes clouded, okay? And if the lens becomes clouded, it's going to cause blurred vision. It's not going to produce a clear image on the retina, and the person is not going to be able to see clearly, right? So the lens becomes opaque, murky, cloudy, right? And therefore does not allow light to pass through. So remember, it's an explain question and it is 2 marks. Therefore, you need to give 2 points. In life sciences, we do not give marks for nothing. So you must make your points in order to get your marks. So we can't say the lens becomes opaque, 2 marks. No, it's an explain question. Therefore, you need to follow up. The lens becomes opaque or cloudy and therefore does not allow light to pass through. Okay, and then state one way in which cataract can be treated, and that is by removing the cataract from the lens, and that is done by surgery. Okay, let's look at another activity. Right, so here we are looking at the same activity, but just more questions on it. So it's the same table, and we've unpacked that data. So let's move on with the questions. Here it says, explain why long-sighted people need to wear glasses with biconvex lens as a corrective material, right? So we're looking at long-sighted people. So long-sightedness, this one here. And why do we need biconvex lenses, right? Even the Cybono logo at the bottom here is showing you an eye, okay? Right, so the lens is less convex, right? The eyeball is too short or the cornea may be flattened, and this causes light rays to fall behind the retina. And that's why a convex lens is needed to increase the refractive power of the lens to make the light fall onto the retina to form a clear picture. So name a visual defect that is characterized by an uneven cornea. I think the C is missing here, an uneven cornea or lens. So we spoke about the uneven cornea and we said that is astigmatism. Okay, so that's the answer for that one. Okay, now I wanted to do this to explain to you an easy way to remember, right? Accommodation has a D, okay, and that D is for distance. Distance for near vision and far vision. When we speak about pupillary mechanism, we are speaking, it talks to light. And in light, we learned about bright light and dim light. So you need to remember this, take a picture of this, and remember every time when you get a question in the exam, is the examiner asking me about distance? In which case D is distance, it's far or near vision, or pupillary mechanism, which is light. And then remember, you need to speak about the muscles that go with it. Okay, here we're speaking about ciliary and suspensory, and here we're speaking about the circle because we are speaking about the pupil. So here we are speaking about radial muscles and circular muscles. Are we together, guys? I hope we are. Okay, let's look at the next activity. In an investigation, Lindy was asked to put a cotton thread through the needle of an eye 10 times with both eyes open, and then only with the right eye. This was done under the same light intensity and at a distance of 50 centimeters from the eye. Now remember, this is an investigation. And if it is an investigation, we need to keep certain variables constant and only change the ones we are investigating. So what are we investigating here? We are in an investigation. Lindy was asked to put cotton thread through the eye of a needle 10 times, right? So first with 2 eyes open here, and then only with 1 eye open. Okay, so we are manipulating that. We are saying 2 eyes and we are saying 1 eye. So that's the variable we are manipulating. That is the independent variable that we are manipulating. And then we are looking at the time that it takes Lindy to thread that needle through the eye, to thread that cotton, through the eye of that needle. So because we are measuring the time, we are measuring, therefore that is the dependent variable. Okay? Right. And what is kept constant? The light intensity is kept constant, same light intensity, and the distance is the same from 50 centimeters from the eyes each time. Right, so we unpacked that. Let's look at the table. These are the attempts 1 to 10, time taken with 2 eyes open and 1 eye open in seconds. That's our unit of measurement. Right, now the question says, apart from the factors mentioned, state 2 other factors that had to be kept constant. And we find this in paper 1 every single time the learners are not reading this paragraph before. They go straight into the table and try and answer questions. Guys, you've got to read. You've got to read. And when we give you the 10 minutes reading time in the exam, it's for a purpose. Make sure you read through your entire paper properly when you are given the reading time, okay? And if you are answering the question, you need to read. So let's look at this. Apart from the factors mentioned, state 2 other factors that could be kept constant, right? So let's look at it. It could be various things. The size of the needle, the thickness of the thread. For one, she can't use wool for one and crochet cotton or thin sewing cotton for the other. The color of the thread. She can't use black and red. Sometimes some people are colorblind. They may find it difficult to thread. So these factors need to be kept constant, right? And then a general conclusion that can be from here is that if you look at this, it says only 1 eye open, right? And here with 2 eyes open. So we can come to a conclusion by saying it takes more time to thread the needle with 1 eye as compared to 2 eyes. Because if you look at this 12:38, right, you can see the difference here, right? Although it's decreasing because maybe she's getting used to it, but the fact is that with 2 eyes open, the time is much quicker than with only 1 eye open. So you could say it takes more time to thread a needle with 1 eye open as compared to both eyes open, or it takes less time to thread a needle with both eyes open as compared to 1 eye, or there are more attempts. The more attempts undertaken to thread the needle, the less time it takes. So look at these investigative questions and unpack them thoroughly. Right, guys, I think we have come now to the end of the session, and I would like to thank you for viewing this. Please go over past papers. All these questions are taken from past papers, and study. Good luck for your June exams, and prepare well in advance, because it is not difficult. If you go over past papers, the easier it becomes. All the best to you. Thank you very much.